Have you ever removed your helmet?
No,
Has it ever been removed by others?
never.
This is the way.
This is the way.
What is the real reason that our hero from The Mandalorian can never remove his helmet? What historical precedent is there for this practice, if there is any at all? And why is it that we see so many other Mandalorians who seem to have no problem removing their helmets? Today, we are talking about the legends and canon backstory of the Mandalorians and examining their cultures and practices to find out why is it that some Mandalorians can remove their helmets, but this is not the way of the Mandalorian.
No living thing has seen me without my helmet since I swore the creed. I am not a living thing.
The Mandalorian Season 1 introduced us to the Way of Mandalore, which is, for those of us who are fans of Legends, something that is very familiar to us. The Mandalorian people, for generations, have been a people of tradition, honor, and nobility. While they are certainly no moral paragons being prone to violence and conquering, they still did have their own form of moral code.
And there's even something respectable about their rugged sense of honor. But they are not our friends.
The Code of the Mandalore, as it was known in Legends, dictated the way a Mandalorian was to behave, fight, and live. And in The Mandalorian Season 1, we found out that it was part of the Way of the Mandalore that the Mandalorians were not permitted to remove their helmets. And this immediately raised questions to those of us who have seen anything more than the movies, because we know from the Clone Wars television series and Star Wars Rebels that we've seen plenty of Mandalorians who removed their helmets. In fact, even if you were under the impression that Jango and Boba Fett were Mandalorians, we also saw Jango Fett removing his helmet. And so this raised immediate questions, and with many believing that this was a post-Imperial practice. However, this did not seem to line up with what we learned from The Mandalorian Season 1, where in Chapter 4, Din Djarin reveals that he has not removed his helmet since he was a boy.
I wasn't much older than they are.
Furthermore, we learned throughout the series of flashbacks, and especially the flashback we see in Chapter 8, that the Mandalorian was adopted into the clans during the Clone Wars era. And since he hasn't removed his helmet since he was a boy, and he was adopted before the rise of the Empire, it seems that the idea that this practice is a post-Imperial practice didn't really line up. As such, the most logical conclusion last year was that this was a practice exclusive to foundlings, since that was an old idea referring to the sacred Mandalorian adoption rituals that had been reintroduced into canon. And since the Mandalorian Din Djarin was the only foundling we had seen on screen up until that point, since they had retconned the idea that Jango Fett was a foundling, we had assumed that this was the way because Din Djarin was a foundling. However, it has recently been confirmed that we were wrong in that assumption last year, and that is in fact not why Din Djarin is forbidden to remove his helmet. In fact, we learned that there is a lot more going on to the Imperial era Mandalorian clans than we had originally anticipated. Last season, we also learned that there was an event known as the Great Purge. And while little is known about the Great Purge at the time, we knew for one that it was an act of the Empire, and in this act, much of the Mandalorian Beskar was confiscated.
These are the spoils of the Great Purge.
We also assumed that Moff Gideon during this battle took the Darksaber for himself, since we know he was an ISB agent during the Purge and he had the possession of the Darksaber at the end of The Mandalorian Season 1. And in this latest episode of The Mandalorian, Chapter 11, we have finally confirmed that Bo-Katan herself did in fact participate and survive the Great Purge. And now she is here in 9 ABY, looking to reclaim the Darksaber and claim the title of Mandalore, the title reserved for the Mandalorian people's greatest warrior and leader, universally recognized by the Mandalorian clans. But now, thanks to Chapter 11, we finally have an answer to the question about Mandalorian helmet removal and why it seemed so inconsistent across various Star Wars titles.
How long has it been since you've taken that off?
Yesterday.
But I don't want to just talk about that answer today. I also want to look at whether or not this is, in fact, something derived from legends and what Mandalorian historical precedent is there for such a rule. In The Mandalorian Chapter 11, it is revealed that Din Djarin comes from a Mandalorian splinter group, a cult of religious zealots known as the Children of the Watch. This immediately brings to mind the title Death Watch, which was a Mandalorian splinter group during the Clone Wars animated series. Death Watch was a splinter group which wanted to return Mandalore to their warrior ways of past. However, unlike the Children of the Watch that we see in the Mandalorian series, the Death Watch group seemed to lack the Mandalorian code of honor and nobility that we see in the ways of the ancient Mandalore from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic and Star Wars The Old Republic, as well as the Mandalorian covert from The Mandalorian Chapter 1.
The Mandalorians embrace conflict and admire strength, but they are different from our dark counterparts.
The Mandalorian people have historically always been defined by a warrior's honor, with strength being the utmost quality that they respect and admire. Because of this admiration of strength, it meant that Mandalorians actually bore no ill will to those who defeated them in combat, since they simply proved that they were superior and worthy of leading.
Warriors do not flee from a battle if they are losing. They fight to the end, as we did against your Jedi Revan.
However, Death Watch functioned much more like either a terrorist group or a militant group of bullies simply attacking the people that got in their way without any real sense of honor or code of warfare. They just went out, attacked, and committed horrible atrocities because they could. The question we have to ask is the group, the Children of the Watch, related to Death Watch? And there is actually some evidence to suggest that they are. The first is that in The Mandalorian Chapter 9, we had finally confirmed that the Mandalorians who rescued Din Djarin wore on their shoulder armor the mark of Clan Vizsla and the Death Watch. This automatically brought to our mind the idea that Death Watch was the ones who saved the Mandalorian. However, this did occur very close in time to the siege of Mandalore that we see in the Clone Wars Season 7. And during that time, the leader of Death Watch was actually Maul, since this took place after the death of Pre Vizsla. And we can know this because of the presence of droid gunships in the air. Despite the fact that this group does have an obvious connection with Death Watch, we do know that the members of Death Watch had no problems removing their helmets, which seems to suggest that this group adopted the practice after the end of the Clone Wars, and was a splinter group that in a way preserved the old ways of Death Watch, but at the same time wanted to combine the methods of Death Watch with the ancient code of Mandalore. So the real question we have to ask is, how does Death Watch differ from the Children of the Watch? And as we already discussed, the Children of the Watch are unable to remove their helmets, whereas Death Watch had no problem with this. We also see that the Children of the Watch have a heavy emphasis on honor, especially when regarding the care of the foundlings. We see this very clearly in The Mandalorian Seasons 1 and 2, that there is a very high emphasis on Din Djarin behaving nobly in the eyes of the other Mandalorians and in accordance with the way. In fact, he is willing to die for this honor. And this is something that we did not see present in the members of Death Watch in the Clone Wars animated series. So the question becomes, why do the Children of the Watch behave differently than the members of Death Watch? Well, according to Bo-Katan, we may actually have a very good answer for that. Bo-Katan says that the Children of the Watch wish to restore Mandalore to the ways of old, to which Din Djarin replies there is only one way, the way of the Mandalore. But is Bo-Katan actually correct? And is this actually an ancient practice of the Mandalorian people? Is there any reference to this in either canon or legends that would tell us why the Mandalorians are incapable of removing their helmet? Well, first, to look at legends, the greatest example of the Mandalorian culture, and to many fans, the reason we fell in love with the Mandalorian culture beyond the awesomeness of their armor, was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, and specifically, the war stories of Canderous Ordo. Canderous Ordo was a Mandalorian who fought in the Great Mandalorian Wars between Mandalore the Ultimate and the Jedi Revan, leading the Republic's armies. And Canderous Ordo survived, but after the war had ended, the Mandalorian clans split, much like we see them do following the Great Purge in The Mandalorian Season 1. Now, during the Knights of the Old Republic era, there is absolutely nothing to suggest that these Mandalorians had an aversion to showing their faces, at least to one another and to their allies. Yes, it would be impossible, or at least very rare, to see a Mandalorian human not wearing a helmet in battle, but this very well could have been for practical or tactical reasons. However, there is something to suggest that they also did this because when they went into battle, they believed that they forsook their personal identity and took on the identity of the Mandalorian people, and they became one people. This is why Mandalore was able to recruit all members of all clans into the Mandalorian army, because even though clan identity took precedent over anything else in daily life, when there was a call to battle, there were no clans, there was only the identity of the Mandalore. And so they would hide their personal identity and take on the identity of the Mandalore and would go into battle as a one unified body of people. However, this does not seem to be the method that is shared by the Children of the Watch, who will not remove their helmet before any living being, and Din Djarin even goes so far as to sacrifice a happy life where he can find fulfillment and peace, because this way of life is so critically important to him.
You and your boy could have a good life.
So is that it? Are the Mandalorians of the Children of the Watch simply over-interpreting this ancient practice? Well, I do actually think that there is another practice that they are referring to, and that is what we find out about Mandalore himself. While the Mandalorian people were permitted to remove their helmet in the presence of others, and particularly allies, and in times of peace, Mandalore himself was not. As we said earlier, Mandalore was the name that would be taken by the person who ruled the Mandalorian people. After a Mandalore had died, the helmet of Mandalore would be claimed by another, and they would put on that helmet and lose their old identity, revoking their old name and taking on the name of Mandalore. Much in the same way as a pharaoh or a Caesar, they would lose who they once were and simply become Mandalore. And the Mandalorian people even seem to believe that wearing the helmet of the past Mandalore would actually transfer the spirit of past Mandalores, so there was truly only one Mandalore across all generations, and the Mandalorian people would rally behind that helmet. And because they lost their old identity by becoming Mandalore, to remove that helmet would be to show that old forsaken identity and prove to the people that this was not Mandalore but was simply a Mandalorian, or Mandoid in their own tongue. In either case, what the Mandalorians of the Children of the Watch seem to be doing is looking back at the old ways and adding restrictions upon restrictions, in either way that you look at it. If you're looking at it that the Mandalorians were not allowed to remove their helmet in battle or in the face of an enemy so that they would take on the identity of the Mandalorian people, then they extend that to all Mandalorians should do that at all time. But if they're drawing it from the identity of Mandalore the sole ruler, then they are extending that rule to, again, all Mandalorians and not just Mandalore the ruler. And they seem to be doing this to try to add validity to their current movement by referencing the old ways, but they are also trying to add restrictions upon restrictions and build a wall around the law, but by doing so losing sight of the code of the Mandalore for the sake of the way of the Mandalore. Despite the fact that I would love to see a return to the old ways of Mandalore from the Old Republic era, this bastardization of their old culture makes a lot of sense to me, because we know that the Mandalorian faith and culture was challenged by the Empire and during the Great Purge, almost being wiped out entirely, and before that the Mandalorians were trying out a path of pacifism, which is the antithesis of the way of the Mandalore. And so it would make sense that them, following these trying times where the Mandalorian people were almost totally destroyed, or at the very least changed beyond recognition, that they would hyper-extend themselves and over-exaggerate the old ways in order to try to regain what they had once lost, losing all the nuance for the sake of exaggeration. But ultimately, I want to know what you guys think. Do you prefer the Code of the Mandalore from the EU and the Old Republic, which does still seem to be canon? Or do you prefer the Way of the Mandalore from the Mandalorian Covert, the one that Din Djarin was adopted to, or the more moderate path represented by Bo-Katan? I guess you could be really lame and prefer the pacifist Mandalorians, but if you're in that camp, well, thank you all so much for watching, and as always, may the lore be with you, now and forever.